The role-playing genre in gaming is a deeply diverse one, paving the way for countless fantasy adventures spanning sci-fi, fantasy, and even modern settings. But regardless of the subgenre or setting an RPG may choose for its world, many of these games deliver on engaging power fantasy experiences. The sci-fi and fantasy genres, including the many subgenres in between, are particularly great at facilitating this. Recent hits like The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion Remastered show that players love an RPG that lets them experiment with character builds that make them feel like powerhouses. Even so, the power fantasy label is broad enough for that to mean different things. Everything from overpowered character builds, much like The Elder Scrolls or even Monster Hunter, to forming ragtag groups of space explorers, like in Mass Effect, are brilliant ways to let players live out their imaginations in an RPG.
Fans of J.R.R. Tolkien's work with his Lord of the Rings universe can explore the darker parts of the lore in Middle-earth: Shadow of War. Taking a more action RPG shift from its predecessor, Shadow of Mordor, this sequel continues the story of Ranger Talion and the elven wraith Celebrimbor to take the war directly to Sauron's forces. The game lets players play a grungier take on Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings mythos with its intense combat and tone. Even if Middle-earth: Shadow of War's protagonist isn't as customizable as more blank slate player characters, fans can still hone plenty of melee, stealth, and magical skills to pummel enemy orcs through its character progression systems. But the standout feature in this Lord of the Rings flavored power fantasy is the famous Nemesis system. With the shifting power dynamics of Talion and the various orc groups' hierarchies, players could revel in crushing rival factions and gain favor among allies to command in this epic wartime setting. Wow, that sounds intense! Really fun!
BioWare's original Mass Effect trilogy has had a lasting impact as one of the most quintessential sci-fi RPGs in gaming. It's an influence that can still be felt today, and Mass Effect Legendary Edition is the perfect way to go on the Normandy Cruise exploits remastered. Players will take command as Commander Shepard and form a well-rounded group of explorers and soldiers as they defend life across the galaxy from invading Reapers and Collectors. For any sci-fi buffs, the original Mass Effect trilogy is a deeply rewarding power fantasy in its combat and storytelling opportunities in role-playing. Getting out Shepard and his crewmates with powerful gear and sci-fi powers leads to incredibly satisfying squad-based combat. The many ways the main and side quests can be influenced through player agency make each playthrough the player's own. And watching the ragtag bunch of heroes operate like a well-oiled machine is reminiscent of the crews of Star Trek and Firefly.
The wizarding role of Harry Potter is one of the foremost modern fantasy IPs, so it's no wonder Hogwarts Legacy struck such a chord with so many longtime fans. The open-world action RPG is set well before the events of the books and movies, putting players in the shoes of a young student at the prestigious magic school. Its protagonist goes on a quest spanning the school and various locales around it to uncover a deep-rooted mystery surrounding Hogwarts. Considering the setting, genre, and source material for Hogwarts Legacy, it's easy to become enamored with what is essentially a magic school simulator. The numerous ways the game lets players customize the look of their young protagonist, learn spells, attend classes, make potions, and interact with and face off against a slew of matchable creatures make it the ideal way to realize a Harry Potter fan's fantasy. It's a pleasantly versatile playground that has almost limitless possibilities to expand in a sequel.
The Diablo series has been among the faces of the action RPG subgenre since the late 90s. While that category has expanded to include notably different games like Skyrim, The Witcher 3, and Elden Ring, Blizzard's Diablo 4 remains a consistently fun game to simply tear through hordes of monsters. This fourth mainline entry sees the protagonist explore a dark fantasy world and thrust into a conflict involving the demonic Lilith summoned to exert her power. What stands out for Diablo 4 gameplay-wise is this addictive hack-and-slash combat system. With 6 classes to choose from, including the Vessel of Hatred DLC's Spiritborn, players get an array of tools to create builds with, to go on countless dungeon-crawling ventures. Diablo 4 also does well to adapt the series' hack-and-slash and looting gameplay loop into the open-world format with procedurally generated dungeons, giving the game plenty of replay factor to clear swaths of enemies off the screen with martial and magical abilities.
CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 has managed an impressive turnaround after years' worth of post-launch support for bug fixing and optimization, and an excellent DLC expansion in Phantom Liberty. With the game working in proper order, players can finally live out a power fantasy worthy of the eponymous sci-fi subgenre. The story revolves around protagonist V, a mercenary with a biochip implant who must work alongside the installed consciousness of rock star Johnny Silverhand to separate from each other. Thanks to Cyberpunk 2077 completing its comeback arc, players are given plenty of toys and an immersive sandbox to play out a cyberpunk fantasy in this gritty world. Even in this grueling dystopian and corporate nightmare, Liberty City facilitates its own brand of catharsis, thanks to its sci-fi arsenal and character progression mechanics. V can be equipped with different mods, guns, cybernetic weapons, and more, so players can explore, fight, and roleplay in this city their way. Pushing back against this seemingly hopeless, cynical future certainly brings about a sense of satisfaction. Games like Larian Studios' breakout hit Baldur's Gate 3 prove that power fantasies and RPGs aren't limited to action RPGs. The acclaimed developer perfectly adapts the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition tabletop RPG in video game form, taking players and their party on a saga-length campaign across the land of Faerun. Players can pick from established origin characters or curate their own for the ultimate medieval power fantasy, as their nuanced party tries to find the cure to the mind-flayer tadpole they've been infected with, and uncover an even more widespread plot. Similar to Mass Effect with sci-fi, Baldur's Gate 3 is a masterclass in letting players live out their adventuring fantasies, but with the added high fantasy flair of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It seamlessly emulates the tabletop experience and gives them a wealth of options and character builds for them and their NPC companions without feeling overwhelming. That goes double for the recent major patch, which adds a staggering 12 more subclasses. Meanwhile, the countless possibilities to devastate enemies as a team with magic and melee, and Baldur's Gate 3's riveting character-driven quests round out a superb Dungeons & Dragons-themed fantasy and video game format. The world of author Andrzej Sapkowski's The Witcher and developer CD Projekt Red's gaming adaptation is undoubtedly bleak. That said, the dark fantasy world seen in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt provides one of the richest RPG experiences in the medium, even 10 years after its release. Elite monster hunter Geralt of Rivia returns on a grand race against time to rescue his surrogate daughter, Ciri, from the Wild Hunt, who are aiming to use her innate powers as harbingers of destruction. Geralt of Rivia is far from being a superhero character. He's an ultimately good, if complex, man in an unforgiving world. But such archetypes would go against The Witcher 3's atmosphere. But he's certainly an expert in his trade, and the game is well paced in its engrossing main quest and equally engaging side quests to make players feel Geralt's martial prowess. Especially considering some of the builds players can tinker with in The Witcher 3, Geralt can use expert swordsmanship, sign magic, and even alchemy against hostile monsters and, as is often the case, similarly vile humans.
Seeing Oblivion Remastered bring back a 2000s RPG classic in such fine form is more than welcome. But that doesn't mean the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim has lost any of its appeal. The game lets players customize their dragonborn hero to take on the fabled dragon Alduin, a prophesied villain hell-bent on unleashing dragons in his apocalypse. However, just a handful of hours into the game, players realize that this experience becomes so much more than its main plot. Skyrim earned acclaim in the early 2010s for its depth in character progression, letting players curate their build as they see fit. Class-based RPGs undoubtedly have their own strengths, but this free-form progression system makes magic-wielding tanks, conjured swordsmen, and everything in between possible. Players can find countless ways to make any character setup into a potential world-beating build, and that's before mods come into the frame. Skyrim's extensive modding community has introduced new game mechanics, with plenty that still feel in line with the Elder Scrolls world, to make every playthrough truly unique.
Skyrim doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, but The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered is a good mix of something old with something new. While its launch hasn't been without optimization issues, Studio Virtuous's update for the 2000s classic has proven to be another fun, high-fantasy romp through a vibrant open world. The game takes players through the hero of Kvatch's story, going from imperial prisoner to a key figure in the land's line of defense against the encroaching monstrosities from the Oblivion Gates. New players and returning Elder Scrolls veterans alike can stumble upon hours worth of fun quest lines to satiate that medieval power fantasy craving. It gives players the freedom to tailor plenty of creative and powerful character builds, even with, like the original Oblivion Remastered's more structured class system compared to Skyrim's open-ended skill progression. This is made all the better with the Remastered's retooled leveling mechanics, which finally allow players minor skills to contribute to progression alongside the major skills. That's on top of featuring some of the series' best side quests, letting players be a Dark Brotherhood assassin to a Master Thief.
Capcom's Monster Hunter Wilds is continuing the ongoing success of the action RPG series, but World is one of the most complete packages in the modern era. Monster Hunter World was the most technically ambitious entry on home consoles at the time, having built up steam for years on the PS2, PSP, and spent a stretch on Nintendo systems. The game tasks players with creating their hunter to investigate the new worlds, the environments, and battle monsters. Crucially, Monster Hunter World is capable of humbling hunters who take on more than they can handle. But after spending time battling wildly imaginative monsters, grinding to craft new gear, and mastering a myriad of weapons, the game's action culminates in one of the most stylish and cathartic combat systems in the action RPG subgenre. Few games can replicate the thrill and powerful sense of satisfaction of Monster Hunter's combat gameplay loop, especially when overcoming the challenging monsters in the Iceborne expansion.